I'm just having my glass of water to get me ready.
Ciao bambini.
Good morning and welcome to our whole school assembly.
Hola!
Let's get some learning on.
Welcome to another day of home learning.
What time is it?
It's time to feel the music.
So we're going to work out the volume of this spindle.
And they're all over the floor.
I consist of 95% water.
We learn grammar through the coolest tool, music.
Super goed.
Godt arbejde i dag, elever.
I just need to keep up. I'm so proud of you. Well done.
Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, which is focused on managing Chrome devices in your school. So in today's webinar, we're going to focus in on the admin console and particularly on the management of the Chrome devices and the Chromebooks that you've got in your school. So a big thank you for joining us. Feel free in the chat over on the right hand side to introduce yourself, say hello, let us know where you're from. Great to see people from all over the UK joining us already today for this webinar. I'm joined today by Dan. Hi, Dan.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Andy.
So my name is Andy Caffrey. I'm a Google Certified Innovator and Certified Trainer based in the West Midlands. I previously worked at a Google for Education reference school where I did indeed look after the admin console and around 1,600 Chromebooks in a domain. And Dan, you're in a similar situation, aren't you?
Yeah, so I'm the IDS and Google lead at a Google reference school in the Northwest. We have between 13 and 1,500 devices as well that we manage. So yeah, pretty similar.
Yeah, in terms of setup. So obviously what we're focusing today is this area around managing Chromebooks and managing Chrome devices within your school. So let's get on and have a look at what we're going to cover today. Before we get started in the chat, it would be great to know what's your favorite Chromebook. So I would imagine lots of people today are either watching us on a Chromebook or have got Chrome devices in your school, given the topic of today's webinar. So if you've got a particular device, maybe the device you're on right now, or maybe you've got a favorite you've used in the past, as it's almost the 10th birthday of Google Chromebooks, I think it's a good time to ask what people's favorite Chromebooks are. My very first Chromebook was a Samsung C303, which was when I look back at it now, a really interesting device. I remember it being quite plastic at the time, and then I've moved on since then, and now I have a Google Pixel Chromebook, which is my favorite from 2015. So my device is 6 years old now, but I still didn't want to change it. Dan, what have you got?
I'm on the Acer Spin 713. It's a brilliant little device. I had the Spin 13 before this one, and then I handed that to my apprentice when he started, and I got myself a new one because why not? But yeah, it's great. I like the 3x2 screen rather than the conventional 16:9. It's nice.
And we can see in the chat all sorts of Chromebooks. It's really interesting to see what's in there. Paul's got a Pixelbook for power and a Lenovo Duet for casual use. He seems to be very well kitted up, doesn't he? Jonathan's got the Acer 713. Bob joining you on the Acer Spin 13. A few Acer Spins in there actually in the chat as well. Another HP X360. So lots of different people in with Chrome devices. Great to see. And as we said, it's also great to be at this point where those devices that seemed so unique 10 years ago have reached the point where they're so popular in education. So big thank you for joining us. And let's now dig in a bit more to what we're going to cover today. So in today's session, it's really sort of broken down into 4 slots. And those 4 slots are looking at the enrolling devices. So how do we enroll devices onto our domain? How does that work? What are the benefits of doing that? Then we're going to talk about the settings on the device itself. Then we're going to focus on user settings, and then we're going to talk about adding apps and extensions. So this webinar is broken down into 4 discrete slots. And as we go through today, if you have any questions you want to ask, there's 2 ways of asking. You can ask questions in the chat. So you can just drop your questions in the YouTube chat that's currently filled with Chromebook devices. You can also go over to our Q&A doc at bit.ly/Chrome QA. And that doc I will go into after today's webinar, and any questions that we don't get the chance to answer, I will go through and answer. So sometimes in these sessions with lots of people watching, we can get way more questions than we have time to answer in the webinar. So after today's webinar, I will jump into that doc and just go through. So keep the doc somewhere, add it to your favorites, put that link somewhere, and feel free to pop back in there to see the answers later if we don't get the chance to answer them in the webinar today. And I'll refer to that as we go. We'll have time for questions as we go through today's webinar. So the Q&A doc is there. It's up and running to add your questions in from this point on. And we're going to be talking a lot around the admin console. A lot of what we're doing today focuses around our ability to manage the Chrome devices inside the admin console. And so we're presuming that most people joining us today have either got access to the admin console, or maybe as a result of watching today, you're going to go and ask in your school to get access to the admin console. So just a first piece that we are going to be sort of really focused around that area of Google. And as we know, any device can access the admin console. And my big word of warning, and I'm showing my age here with a Hill Street Blues clip, but when we are operating in the admin console, we need to be careful about what we're doing. You know, the admin console is a great place, but as we make changes, if you are sitting today and you are watching and you're going through and you're making changes to the Chrome devices in your domain, that's going to directly affect other people who might right now be using those devices, doing their homework if they're at the end of school, or if you've got after school classes on, you know, using those devices. So like a big word of warning, you know, let's think carefully about the changes you make. And very often what I would do, and we'll talk about more about this when we get into the admin console, is I often used to have little test organization units, test OUs, with just a single Chromebook in them. And I would make the change on the test OU first, pop on the Chromebook, say, check that's what I expected to happen before I maybe made a change to 1,600 Chromebooks. So thinking carefully about, as we make changes, being aware of what that's going to do to our users as they're using them. So let's be careful. And also, don't forget to, consult. I always believe that in a school, the good use of technology is a partnership between the people providing the network, and often in secondaries, network support teams or network managers, and the teaching staff who've got genuine reasons for things to be turned on and turned off, and access to be varied maybe in different ways. So it's always worth consulting with the people around you. If you're on the network side, is the changes appropriate for teachers? If you're on the teaching side, is the change appropriate for network staff? It's that communication that is important when we're talking about making changes in the admin console. So a couple of admin console disclaimers there up front. And just to say that, Chromebooks and the Chrome browser has come a long way. Chromebooks, as we said, 10 years old. The Chrome browser at 12 years. Really doesn't feel very long at all. That, the devices have only been around as long as almost the students in our year 7 year groups. And they've come through a huge amount of change over that time as more and more features become developed for those devices, but also more and more variations for the device. And it was only a sort of a year ago, 2019, 2020, we talked about 200 different settings in the admin console, and now there's 500 settings in the admin console. So there's the choice of how we want to set things up just grows exponentially over time. So that's really useful. But also, it means there's a lot to talk about. And we don't have time in today's webinar to go through all 500 settings in the admin console. That would be a sort of, a 4 or 5 hour webinar. So what we're focusing on today is talking about Chrome devices and the common settings for schools. So the settings that are most likely you're going to want to go near in terms of using those devices for either students in school and students at home. And that's the focus of what we're doing today. So a bit of development there of the console. So let's get started. Let's get up with our first topic, and we're going to start by just about enrolling devices. When we get a Chromebook, how do we get it so we can control that Chromebook? So the first thing to make people really aware of, and I think a lot of people on the call probably understand this already, is there is something called the Chrome Education Upgrade, and that is a license that sits in our admin console that allows us to control Chromebooks. And looking at my screen here on the left-hand side, we can see that we've got there the a device that's open, a device that isn't controlled. So if we don't have a Chrome Education Upgrade on a device, then effectively when it powers up, we have no control over the device at that point. And so we'll get to the very first screen of just a Chromebook. Imagine you bought a Chromebook from a shop, get to the first screen. Obviously, any user can sign in at that point. So any Gmail account could sign in, a school account could sign in, any account that can sign into a Chromebook could sign in. And we could also, to avoid signing in, click the guest mode button and go into the Chromebook in guest mode. So when we've got an open device, one without a license on, it's got that openness. Once we sign in, we could then put restrictions on a user. So if we had an open device and then a student signed in with a school account, we could put restrictions onto that user, but we couldn't force them to sign into that school account. Whereas on a managed device, one which has a Chrome Education Upgrade on it, we have a lot more control over that device. From the moment it powers on, we're in control of the choices are going to be. So we can restrict the sign-in, we can make it come onto a school account, we can decide various things around that. We're going to see these settings in a moment when we go into device settings. So we have a lot more control when the device powers up. That's the first line of defense, if you like. And then, of course, when they sign into the school domain, and we might restrict it so they can only sign to that, then all the user policies are going to kick in as well. So the managed devices with the Chrome Education Upgrades have a lot more control. And it's important to understand the difference between the two, because I've worked with some schools where they don't have the upgrade, so then they've not got that choice of device control. We would always recommend that if you're getting Chromebooks, that you get the licenses to put them into your console to be able to control them from the moment they power up. And I think that's common good practice along a lot of education users with Chromebooks. So just a bit about the having the license there. In terms of enrolling a Chromebook, so right now, probably the most common way of enrolling a Chromebook is to take it out of its box, power it up, press the magic keys, Control Alt and E, which tells the Chromebook you want to do an enterprise enrollment. You press that on the sign-in screen, Control Alt E. It takes you to an enterprise enrollment screen, and if you then sign in with an account from in your domain, and you have licenses available in the domain, which talked about those education upgrades, then that device will be bound to your domain. They'll be linked together to your domain. So that's the current way, the most common way I would say that people go about that, to take a device at the box, Control Alt E, sign in, often with a default admin account. Some people use the student at that point to sign in, and then that device is bound to the domain, it's controlled, and then the things we're going to talk about with device policies would apply to that device. There are a couple of other ways of doing it. Some people may have seen there are some tools out there, third-party tools, that allow you to effectively put a little memory stick in the device to allow it to bulk enroll if you don't want to press Control Alt and E a lot of times, if you're doing lots of devices. But one of the big things that Google announced about 2-3 weeks ago at the Learning with Google event was that coming this year, we have something called zero-touch enrollment for Chrome OS devices. And really the way that concept works is that most of us who work in schools are buying devices in bulk. We're working with a reseller or some sort of third party to get our devices. And because that third party know what devices we're getting, they know the serial numbers, they can effectively give us what we call zero touch. So when the device arrives in school, it's already gone through that process itself. It knows when it powers up and it comes onto the Wi-Fi, it knows that it's enrolled in a domain, and it will then be able to go straight to the next phase of being in the console. So just a word, I suppose, a thing to mention at this point. At the moment, we go through the keyboard route, but I think progressively over the coming months and coming years, we'll probably see this route becoming a lot more common, which is Chromebooks arriving in school, shipped by a reseller to that school, and already being enrolled in the domain. So we might find that dies out a bit as we go through. So zero-touch enrollment coming out to Chromebooks, and again, it depends on who you're getting your Chromebooks from. It's only on certain models, and it will filter through to all models, but talk to your resellers if you're interested in that route. And obviously, if you're deploying large numbers, that's got a potential sort of time saving around IT, that the devices could be in their box then handed to students to go off and use straight off. So just a few things about enrolling devices there into the console. I'm in the admin console. I'm going to just jump back a step here. Going to just go into my admin console to show you, okay, so we've got devices. What are we now going to, what they're going to look like? Where do they appear? So here I am in an admin console, and just to be a disclaimer here, we use a training domain when we're displaying. So I'm not displaying any live student data from a real school. This is a training domain, so it's only got a limited number of things in it. From the home page of the admin console, I go over to devices. And that initially takes me to this page that shows me the different sorts of devices I can manage. And then on the we can see Chrome devices here. And then when I click on Chrome devices, it takes us to this page here where we see our devices. So this is very untypical because, as I said, when I worked the last school I worked at, we had 16,000 devices on this page. This domain has 2 devices in it, and there they are. So these devices have been enrolled. Someone has pressed Control Alt and E and enrolled them in. And in fact, I can see which account you enrolled them in a second. See the serial number. Then, if I click on the device, I can get some more information about it. So if I click on this device, it takes me to a page about that particular device in my domain. This is in my domain. Here I can see what it is. It's a Chromebook R11. I can see the serial number. I can see down here who initially enrolled it. So the admin account in this domain was used to enroll it initially. And then a bit further down, just some system activity. Things like the most recent users. So if you like, where is this Chromebook? Who's using it? Where's it gone? I can see who recently signed on. Some things about just background information about the memory and when it was last online for 22 minutes on the 17th of March. So when it was last used and so on. That doesn't that's been online for a long time, that Chromebook, hasn't it? It's been nearly a year disappeared. And so as we go through, we can see some settings about the devices within there. Over on the left-hand side, we have some choices for things we might want to do with this device. So the first thing to be really clear about back on our devices page is that our devices can live in organizational units. And these are little areas within our admin console where we can store different devices, because you might not want to apply the same rules to everybody. And a really good example of that would be students versus staff. You might want your staff to have a very different experience on their Chromebooks or their Chrome devices to the students who may need a more controlled device. And even within students, if you've got a range of ages in your school, you might want very different settings for your youngest students to maybe you've got 17, 18-year-olds in sixth form. So one of the things we can do is we can organize our devices just like we can organize our users into organizational units on the left. And that's really important to start thinking about, because as you apply your policies, you might say, well, I'd quite like to maybe really restrict the students. I'd quite like maybe to have the staff having a bit more openness, a bit more flexibility around their devices. And so think about where you're going to put the devices when you're enrolling. And obviously what we could do there on that page when we were in that device is we could move around, put it in maybe a staff or a student area for devices. Other options, we can reset it. So we can cause the device to reset. We can disable it and we can deprovision it. It's important to understand the difference between these two. So disable it basically is going to lock the device. And so often when I was working with lots of devices, we would say, well, where's this device gone? Who's got this Chromebook? And sometimes I might just go, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll disable it. And then that person will probably turn up and knock on my door and go, my Chromebook is locked. What is happening? And then they would, we could then work out where that device was. Deprovision it removes the license off it and takes it off the domain. It's really a sort of an end of lifetime move when that Chromebook is going elsewhere. I worked in the school I last worked in. We had some students who had purchased their own Chromebooks but were controlled in our domain. We had a license on them. Obviously, when that student gets to the end of the time at school, they're going to keep the Chromebook. It's theirs, but we're going to remove all our control on that device, so deprovision it off the domain. So we would then come and hit the deprovision button in that way. So just some of the big options there on the devices page. And so thinking about enrolling devices, coming into the console, thinking about where they are, being able to see them on this page here and being able to just move them around. Just some of the key things we need to understand before we start applying any settings is just how to set them up. As we're going through today, obviously we don't forget, I'm seeing lots of questions come in the chat already, that you can add your questions at any point you want at bit.ly/Chrome QA. So we're going to try and answer questions as we go, but also if you've got things that you want to know about, then feel free to drop them in the Q&A doc as well. And there are some questions coming in. I've seen the question that we get quite a lot early on. Try and find it again now, where somebody asked about recording of the webinars. It was asked a bit earlier on. Oh yeah, access to presentation and access to the after. So the video will always be available. Thank you, Mrs. Blockley. The video will always be available on YouTube to watch at this link. Because what we're going to do today is obviously go through in a second, start going into console through the settings. And what you might want to do, and I think would be good practice at some point, is to sit there with your admin console open and talk about, as we go through the settings, think about your own settings. And you might want to do that at a much slower pace. So I would say, don't go and make big changes now as we're talking live. Feel free to watch this back at any time on YouTube. Go through, pause it, think about what the best setting is for you and your students, and then go through and, if you like, audit or make changes on your own domain. And that's a really great way of using this video and the videos that we're producing to help you think about your settings. So always available at any time. Feel free to ask any other questions in the chat. I'm trying to save the questions relevant for the sections, and we can talk about that as we go. So that was the enrolling a device, getting a device so it's in our console so we can control it. Now we've got devices in our console, the next thing we want to then talk about is, well, let's talk about the device settings. So remember we said a little bit earlier, I'm going to jump back a few slides, we said that if you've got a managed device and you power up the device and you press the power button, those device restrictions, those device settings are coming in first straight away and controlling the device. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time in my console just talking about what those settings would be and some of the settings you'll probably have for a school. So I'll go back to the home page, go from the start. Oh, and at this point, as we can see, as always happens when I'm live on YouTube, the console has logged me out again. And this is a deliberate security feature. Unlike the rest of Google, where mostly you just stay signed in the whole time, when you are in the admin console, you need to sign in. Especially if you start making lots of changes, very often it will take you out and make you just do a sign in just to make sure that you are the right person. So we might start again. That's the first time today of me being logged out. So back from the home page, I'll come into the side menu this time. I like the side menu. I find it a really logical way of moving around. Into the side menu, I'm going to go to devices in Chrome because that's what I want to look at. I want to start putting some device policies in for my Chrome devices. This brings up my Chrome management page. And I said what we're going to do first is talk about our device settings. So down here in the list, we've got device settings, and we're going to talk about those. So when my Chromebook powers up, what controls do I want at that point? Before a user's even signed on at this point, what do I want in terms of my settings? So let's talk through some of the settings on this page and how they go. So the first one, let's go from the very top, force re-enrollment. Force device to automatically re-enroll after wiping. That means that if someone wipes the device, it's going to automatically re-enroll itself back onto your domain again. I never almost know why this is a choice, because I can't imagine why you want someone to be able to take a device off a domain the other way around. But that should be left exactly as it is now. That when a device is wiped, it still just enrolls back on your domain. It stays with you in your school until you choose in the settings area, like we talked earlier, to deprovision it. Power wash allows a device to be wiped, so you might leave that on as it is. And normally you'd leave these settings here. Now, as I said, there's a lot of settings in the console. There's 500 of them now. So we're not going to spend today going through every settings. I'm going to jump down the list and I'm going to skim to the ones that are relevant for us in education to either make changes to or to apply to our settings. So disabled device return instructions. Do you remember we talked about we might lock a device? What do we want on that? What do we want to come up on the screen? And that's where the message goes. So I've got please contact us at Canopy about this device, but you might say please bring to the IT office, please return to student support. Where do your Chromebooks go when people want to ask questions? Probably put the school name, maybe the school phone number in there as well, should somebody have a device off site or come across one of your devices that you've locked. Maybe ring the school on this number. So that's just your device return instructions for anyone who sees it. So again, think about what you're going to put there. Coming down, so here we go, the sign-in settings. When the Chromebook powers up, what do we want to have happen? I would suggest the following. Firstly, disabling guest mode. Guest mode allows someone to use the device without even having a Google account. Obviously, it's going to allow them straight on the internet and bypass all of the other settings we put in place. So most of the time, we're going to disable guest mode, unless the only use case scenario for this is sometimes I'm working with universities. Maybe they're going to have a bank of Chromebooks for people just to use for web research in the library, and they're going to therefore have them on guest mode. So it's rare, but I would say for the bulk of us, disabling guest mode. Sign-in restriction. Who do you want to be able to sign in on your devices? So I'm on a training domain here, so we've allowed any user to sign in, which means at this point, although the device is controlled, they could sign in with a Gmail account, their own personal account, or a school account. You probably, I would say, on most of your school devices, want to restrict this to a list of users. So it's the people from your school that can sign onto that device. So I'd say for sign-in restriction, the most common setting is restrict to a list of users, particularly on student devices. Because bear in mind, on the left-hand side here, we can pick what group of users this is going to apply to. So we might decide that on all our student Chromebooks, we're going to restrict the sign-in, but maybe our staff Chromebooks, we might allow them to go over to their Gmail account or something else. Again, your choice. But because we can do that for the different organizational units, we can have different policies for different groups of people. So maybe we're going to restrict the list to a set of users. We could change that there, sign-in restriction. And now a setting that I think is very popular, particularly when you're working with younger students, and particularly if you're in the unfortunate situation of having very long domain names, is the ability to auto-complete the domain name. And so what this means is when the Chromebook powers up, it will already have the @ symbol and the end of your domain on the screen filled in, ready for the student to just simply put their username in. So if your domain name is the Church of St Mary and Peter Primary and Infant School, and it's very long for students to type, and you're working with maybe year 1 and year 2 students who type very slowly, at that point you want to do an auto domain complete, don't you? So they're going to type their username in, the end will be there, and they log onto the device. So I think that's a really useful feature, particularly with younger students, to have set to your school domain name. And then further down, a few other options. Sign-in screen. Do you want to see the photos and usernames? Sometimes you don't want like the previous photos of people on there, so we can turn that off and on at this point. If you've got Chromebooks on a trolley, maybe in a classroom, different students using different devices every day. Although we could do the reset as well on the device to remove all users each time it resets. We might also turn off the username. So if they're swapping devices, somebody signs out and passes it to their friend, it hasn't got their photo on that page. So we might change the sign-in screen. And then this is an interesting one, device off hours. So device off hours allows us to set certain times of day where our restrictions don't apply. So what that means is if you've gone down a route maybe where parents are contributing or buying Chromebooks, which is sometimes common, you can have a device that in the school day from 9 a.m. to 3:30 is restricted. Only the students from your school can sign in. It's heavily controlled. And maybe at 3:30 or whatever time you decide, you could lift that restriction by adding times in here. So we could add in a set of hours. And we could say, okay, Monday at 4 p.m. until Monday at whatever time we decide to turn this off, we're gonna have device off hours. So we're going to do that. We're going to set hours during which some restrictions won't apply. And that allows you, if you've got this sort of mixed environment of, well, it's my Chromebook, but I want you to control it in school, it allows us to set some of those policies should we choose to go down that road. Below that, just some to making devices. Oh, there's always an interesting one, device wallpaper. So this is actually the wallpaper on the sign-in screen. So just when the device powers up, do we want to have a nice sort of image on that sign-in screen? And it has to be a JPEG and it has to be no bigger than 16 megabytes in size. So some restrictions on that. But if you want your own school sign-in feature at that point, you can upload the image there. So device wallpaper image. Bear in mind when the student signs in, that's when the user policies kick in. And so when Dan's explaining user policies in a bit, he'll probably mention the backgrounds there at that point. That's when you can have their own background on that page. But this is the sign-in page. So device wallpaper image there. And then we go into a whole load of what I would call more niche settings on this page around certain permissions, whether we need to use certain certificates and clients. I'm not going to spend any time digging into these today because these are going to be niche based on use case. What I would say is there are a range of other ways you can sign into devices. And there are third-party tools out there like QR code signing from Wand that allow you to sign into devices in different ways. And if you're going to use one of those, they will guide you in terms of the changes made. You'd obviously need to turn the camera on and various changes we just saw there to control a device in that way. So I'm going to not spend any time talking about that today, but if you think that's useful, there are third-party tools you could use to aid signing process. And obviously the keyboard here. Do we want to have a particular keyboard? Some people I know are joining us today from Belgium. I've seen Kim in the chat from Sweden. So he might have his devices set to a certain keyboard if they're going to use that as a they're going to use that as an on-screen keyboard to sign in. And again, then coming down the list here are the accessibility tools. So Chromebooks have a really nice range of accessibility tools built into them, and certain users may need to have those tools applied, so they come in. And of course, that's great if you think about when we have a student who signs in, and when they sign in, maybe they have a certain accessibility tool comes on. But of course, we're talking now at this point about, well, we power up the Chromebook and what comes up on the sign-in page. And some of our students may need assistance with that page. It's no good saying, well, we've put all these accessibility tools in, but then the student can't get themselves through their sign-in page to access all the tools we've assigned to them on their user account. So what we can do at this point is we can actually turn on the accessibility tools to be on the sign-in page. And again, we could move a student's Chromebook into its own unique organizational unit on the left-hand side here. We could make them a special little group of just their Chromebook. And at that point, we could, with the tools over the left-hand side here, we could effectively force on some of the tools. So thinking about meeting the needs of some of your students who've got additional learning needs or particular needs out of their Chromebook, if we need to, for example, this one's spoken feedback, we could force a Chromebook to always have spoken feedback from the point it powers up. And that's going to help our user get through sign-in to then have the user settings and all the other tools we might have applied to them at the point they sign in. So really useful that we can not only force accessibility on students, but we can do it right back at the sign-in page. So again, consider that. I would say always have allowed the user to decide. I don't understand why some organizations turn off accessibility tools. So I would say the minimum is allow the user to decide. But again, for certain students, you might want to force on things like high contrast mode, screen magnifier. If we've got a student and it's their Chromebook and we know the serial number, we put it in an OU, we force on screen magnifier. So again, accessibility tools there. And you see there's a lot of them on this page that allow us to really filter those tools down. Below that, we've got some device update settings. So Chromebooks by default magically update in the background. One of the things I love about my Chromebook is that when I restart it, if there's a new version of Chrome come out, it just does its thing and updates, and I don't really need to wait or do anything. It just restarts. So most of the time, you're probably going to allow updates. You want your devices doing that. You want your devices rolling updates, and you want to scatter them over a period of time, which you can choose to do. So that's on that page. The other thing you'll see mentioned occasionally, and again, we're not going to go into detail on this today, is you'll see as I go through some of the settings reference to kiosk mode. Kiosk mode is when we get a device, Chromebook, and we want it to do one thing and one thing only. And common examples of kiosk modes in schools, there's two common examples for a kiosk mode Chromebook. One example is a sign display system. So in the school I worked in, if we had broken Chromebooks and it got past perhaps the point where the screen couldn't be repaired any longer, we would often take that Chromebook, stick it behind a big TV screen and use it to drive that display. We would put it in kiosk mode. When it started up, it would go to set of Google Slides and just rotate round. So again, that's done through device settings, creating a kiosk mode. So that's one common use of kiosk mode in schools for displays. And the other common use of kiosk mode is for when you want to control devices for things like exams. And there's lots of third-party tools that can create exam environments on Chromebooks. And again, you might do that in a kiosk mode. So not going to dig into that too much today. We're focusing really on devices that are going to be home and school and used by students. But just bear in mind that exists as another option in here. And so you'll see things talk about what about the chaos mode? Do we, do you want to do something different with your chaos mode devices? And here is the chaos mode settings for that. And again, nice if you are using chaos mode that you can actually now do this, which is you can now receive alerts if there's something wrong with the device. So you can receive an alert by SMS message if you want to your IT team if one of your chaos modes, like if your device stuck behind a big screen has gone down or having problems. So that's chaos mode, and that exists on this page. And so those are some of the device settings that we might want to put in place. Now, I made a change earlier on. I did some of the timing changes. So bear in mind this about the admin console. If you make changes in the admin console, you've got to press save. We all get so used in Google to not having a save button anywhere that I would be a millionaire if I'd had £1 for every time I came off admin console and didn't press save on my settings changes. So whenever we make a change in admin console, we have to confirm that button, press save, and at that point, that change goes live. It goes live to all my users, and my devices will start to do whatever it is I just changed and have in place. And so that, I'm going to come back out of this. That is taking us through some of the browser settings. Sorry, some of the device settings on our Chromebook to get us to the point where a user is going to sign in. So Dan's going to join me now because Dan's going to take us on to start looking at user settings. Before we do, I'm going to just quickly scan the chat to see whether we've got a question. Now, someone made an interesting comment, actually. It was Will. Obviously, I might be picking up the end of a conversation here when he pointed out to me that he put, when you restart it, no student ever restarts their device unless they're forced to. And that's a really good point, isn't it? Which is that, of course, Chromebooks update when they restart. And if you don't restart your device ever, you get stuck where you are. Dan, do you have that issue with some of your students?
Yeah, especially at the moment, with how fast updates have been coming out left, right, and centre. I was just dreaming for a chance that some students would just restart their devices and get the updates. But yeah, it's just one of those things, isn't it? Got to deal with it.
Yeah, some of the later devices can be restarted in console, but it depends on the device you've got out there. And that's only specific devices. But there is that piece. And it's a valid point there from Wilhelm in the chat. I'm just trying to see about this. Was a question from Simon. With the autocomplete, with the auto domain complete, can you have more than one domain list if you're a Mac? No, it needs to be one single domain. If you're a Mac, one of your options, of course, is to put your Chromebooks into organizational units by the schools that you think they're in. And then obviously autocomplete on that piece. So you can have different ones in different OUs, but it needs to be one domain. What I would say is it is possible to have autocomplete, but still allow users from other domains to sign in. So what happens there is as the user writes their username, so let's imagine we are in a MAT and somebody from a different school or a teacher from a different school comes in to do some teaching and wants to sign into a device. They simply, when they put the @ symbol in and start to write what their domain name is, it allows them just to overwrite it. So you can unlock the device for multiple domains and then still have autocomplete and use it that way. So that might be a solution for Simon's MAT and multiple users question. Okay, Dan, I will hand over to you to start taking us through some of the user settings. So I'll add your screen in.
Perfect.
And if you want to take us through some of the settings for users.
Of course. Right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Hopefully you've learned something great so far with Andy's training. So we're going to look at user settings. So Andy's gone through device. So that's where the settings that device has before you've signed in. The user settings are the settings the device has after signing in. So to get there, it's very similar to where Andy just was. So from the side menu, we can go down to devices, over to Chrome. And here we've got settings and user and browsers. So this is the area which we're now going to look at. The device settings tab here is what Andy's just been through. So just here is what we're going to look at now. Now, Andy mentioned that you can set the device wallpaper, which is obviously pre-log-on. After log-on, this is where you set it in the custom wallpaper section here. I can click view here and I can see what it's currently set to. And if I want to change that, I can upload, delete it, remove it completely, or I can upload my own. For example, at our school, we have a picture of our school. So we're just going to cycle down now and go through some other settings that we might have. So one thing I want to quickly mention is you'll notice that under these settings, there's some little icons. Here you've got a little Chromebook, or what looks like a Chromebook. It's a laptop type device. And if you hover over it, the tooltip shows you it's available on Chrome OS devices. Another example here, it shows you the Chrome logo, so that's available on Chrome browser. So that will apply to the Chrome browser on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And the little Android logo, you can guess what that means. It's available on Android devices. The reason they're there is that you can quickly see when you look at any kind of setting in this page, what device it's going to apply to, whether it's going to apply to everything, whether it's just going to apply to Chromebooks. So it gives you an idea of what you're controlling and when. So let's keep scrolling and we'll get to something that we next need to talk about. Now, obviously, as Andy said, there is a lot of policies and settings in here, so we're not going to go through them all. Just want to quickly touch on these enrollment controls. Depending on how you enroll your devices, depending on whether you'll need to touch these, it could be quite niche. You might want to leave it. For example, we have an enrollment account per year group, and that automatically puts devices into specific OUs. And to control what happens and how that happens is you create a user and you change these settings here. I won't go into too much detail, but if that's interest, this is where you can get those settings. Apps and extensions, I'm going to get to that later on, but this is just links to the apps and extensions bit, but we'll get to that in the next section. Again, password manager, this is an interesting one which has come up a few times. So this is the password manager that is directly within Chrome. So you'll probably all be aware that it is there, it exists. When you try and log into a website, it'll ask you, do you want to save your password and things like that. Now, technically, I have that turned off on especially the OU that the IT team sits in, simply because I have a third-party password manager which handles all our passwords for infrastructure and things like that. So it's stops me accidentally saving something where I don't really want it to be saved. And you can change settings like that there. A lot of these can be quite niche, like Andy suggested in the device settings, so I won't go through them all. But obviously, if you've got any questions, there's the doc that you can chuck them in, or you can chuck them in the chat and we'll try and get to them. Incognito mode, that always comes up. Sometimes you would like it on, sometimes you won't want it on. For example, for staff, we have it on. I know if you're a techie, incognito mode's a godsend half the time. It's really useful. But for students, we have it off. And obviously, you just change those settings via OU, which you've gone through. Browser history, that's another one which you might want to always save browser history. You can never save browser history. I don't see a situation where you want to do that. But make sure if you always save it, you can then do not allow the clear browser history settings. So from a safeguarding point of view, for example, if you want to ensure students can't clear the browser history, I'm guessing you're going to have maybe other tools in place there anyway, but it's a catch-all at the bottom. Force ephemeral mode. This is one which you might not use all the time, but it's one that we've used in the past. This just applies to the Chrome browser. So not necessarily Chromebooks, but it could be useful. It erases local data when the browser is closed. So if you've got devices, personal devices, maybe you've got some level of BYOD on your network, that can be quite useful too. Let's jump on down. We might jump past quite a few of these. Show logout button, in tray. Very straightforward. By turning that on in the tray at the bottom, it allows you to log out. If you do not show a logout button, you can't log out through that. You would have to shut the device down. So you can turn that on or off from there. Network settings. This is gets very technical in this setting. It's quite a large section. If we cycle through this, I don't think I'm going to go into detail in too much of these. This one which might come up is the WebRTC UDP ports. Some schools I've spoken to, the IT teams have locked this down quite much because you can specify a range and then forget that they've done that. So then they've realized that some online platforms that the Chromebooks are trying to use aren't working. They've allowed it through the firewalls and things like that. And then they realized that they've not allowed the range in that setting. So one bit of advice I will give, if you make a change in the admin console, try and remember that you've done it because it can come back and bite you if you forget. Maybe it was months ago, maybe even years ago, and then it was very simple fix to that problem, but just remember that you've done it in the first place. Don't think we're going to cover any more of these. This is the very high level technical side of things, which, as Andy mentioned, it might only be relevant in specific cases. So for your school, you might not have to touch this at all. Some schools might have to touch this section a lot. So we'll just fly through this. Startup. This is brilliant for helping both staff and students when they start their Chromebook. Now, again, this comes back to the comment about that students don't restart the devices. So technically, this might only happen once every blue moon, but it is useful. So the home button, you can technically never show the home button, but if you're going to set a home page, you might as well show the home button. So we'll say always show the home button. The home page, you can put the URL here as to what it might be. In this case, it's Classroom, but you might set it to your intranet. As an example, we've got an intranet run on Google Sites. So our staff OU, our home page is our staff dashboard. Our students OUs go to the student dashboard, so it keeps it separate. And if you ever click the home button, that takes you straight there. The new tab page, if you leave this empty, it just opens up a new tab as by default. But if you want to chuck in a URL into that box there, you can make your new tab whatever website you want it to be. Pages to load on startup. Now, you can put a list here, just one URL per line, and you can put a list of there. So every time you start your Chromebook, it will load all those. So as an example, again, we have Gmail load, Classroom load, Drive load, and that might be it. There might be more, but we load the key things that every teacher is going to need immediately, effectively, and it will save time, only small amounts of time, but over the years and whatnot, that adds up. It saves you having to go click if it's just there as soon as you open your Chromebook. So we'll just scroll on down again. Another useful tool here. So now onto the content section. So here is your settings for safe search and restricted mode. Safe search applies to Google search queries and restricted mode applies to YouTube. So you can set safe search on here and enforce restricted or do not enforce restricted, or you can enforce at least moderate restricted depending on how you want to do it. Scrolling down again, past all these. Don't think there's anything we want to go through. Flash, block Flash, don't allow Flash, not anymore. URL blocking. Now, just a bit of a disclaimer here. This is not filtering. Don't think that you can get rid of your filtering platform and just chuck all the URLs you want to block in this list. Please don't do that. You will still need filtering as well. But if there's anything which you want an extra layer of security, you might want to pop those in there. You can drop some exceptions in this next box, but just remember that this is not filtering. It's not a filtering system. Cast. A lot of people use Cast. We've got Chromecast in some of our classrooms. Now, we only allow staff to cast because Chromecasts don't have any sort of user mode, if you will, in terms of there's no restriction on who can do it. If someone's got access to it, they can cast to it. So the way you can stop that is by allowing specific OUs to cast. So our staff have, they are allowed to cast and students aren't. And you can set this through this setting. Again, all filtered by organizational unit. We're going to move on to, well, let's find out. I know printing is coming up, and I know there was a question in the chat about printing, but I'm going to come back to that in the Q&A bit at the end of this session. Well, at the end of this section, as yes, you're quite right. Google Cloud Print, is also being discontinued. So we'll talk about what you might have as a solution going forward on that. But let's carry on past the printing section. Bookmarks, you might want to obviously manage the bookmarks and the bookmark bar. You can enable the bookmark bar, disable it, allow the users to decide. Maybe you don't want them to bookmark, you can disable it there if you so wish, or you can force it on if you so wish as well. Shelf is the taskbar at the bottom, which is this bit down here with your icons. Now, shelf auto hiding, this is a bit niche, but I'm going to cover it anyway because sometimes it can catch you out. If you allow the user to decide whether the shelf can auto hide or not, you might find students like it to hide. I mean, I understand why you'd want to hide it, because it gives you more screen real estate. You can see what you're looking at a bit better. Now, some filtering systems, including the one that we use, which is an extension that installs on the Chromebook, that requires, and well, it's not going into the technicalities as to why, but how it can tell the student or any user is logged in includes the process of looking for the shelf. So if you hide the shelf, the extension cannot tell that a user is logged in, and therefore filtering defaults to, well, or at least our filtering defaults to block. So we have that turned off, so students can't do that because that was a faff. Might not be relevant to you guys, but if you come across any having issues like that, that is where you can stop that from happening quite simply. Right, let's jump on down. Let's see what else have we got here. Again, there's so many useful settings. It could take an age to go through them all, but it's great practice to actually go through and find out what each of them does. So a great example is if I want to find out what this tool does, because I don't know, if I hover over it, you can see the question mark on the right hand side. If I click that, that opens up the Google help page for that specific tool. Then you can read about it. It'll link to other knowledge base articles as well. It's a great little way of finding out more information very quickly while you're sat within the admin console. So let's jump on down again, see what we want to look at next. There is like things like full screen mode. I can turn that off if I wanted to. There's settings for everything. You just need to be aware. There is one thing I'm looking for. Here it is. Dinosaur game. I'm sure you'll all be familiar about the dinosaur game. I remember when that was first found. It was amazing. And I was at high school myself at that point, and we exploited it to no end. So I know that students will love to do that if you let them, but you can turn it off. If you don't know what the dinosaur game is, if you lose internet connection while you're in Chrome, you get a little dinosaur, you can jump over cacti and dodge vultures or birds, whatever they are. Now, we at school purposely unplugged all our PCs so we could play the game and not do any work. So you can stop that by doing that. So you can allow the users to play the dinosaur game when the device is offline on the Chrome browser, but not on enrolled Chrome OS devices. So you can pick whether you want to block them from it completely or have them a little bit of fun. Let's see what we're looking for. Accessibility, which should be coming up shortly. Maybe. Yes. So Andy covered this from a device settings point of view. So you can force on accessibility settings as the device turns on. For the same thing, you can do the exact same thing once the student is logged in. So if you know you've got a list of students who have specific accessibility requirements, you can come in here and set them to automatically come on as they log in. Things like large cursor, which I'm actually using right now to make my cursor bigger so you can see it, and cursor highlight. Those things are really useful, especially if you're doing training. I know it's not exactly related, but it's useful to help. But there's all kind of accessibility features, and the amount keeps growing as well and keeps getting updated. Especially, there's been some recent updates that Learning with Google announced as well. You can actually technically change the search provider on the Omnibox. I don't know why you'd want to, but you can do. And there is another one which I'm looking for, which I might have already passed. It's not that important, but we'll keep going. Safe browsing, here it is. So you can allow the user to decide whether you want to safe browse, or you can enable it. Obviously in schools, we can definitely would like to enable it, especially for students and whatnot. Now, we'll probably leave it there. There's some other ones which might be relevant. We're nearly at the end. Let me just double check because I don't want to miss anything. Virtual machines, that's if you want to run Linux. And Parallels is a relatively new thing as well, and that's running virtual machines, like Windows virtual machines on your Chrome books through the user settings. But I think that is pretty much it now for user settings. So hopefully you've got some questions. And
there are some questions coming in, so I'm going to try and pick a few down that we can go through.
No problem.
But thank you for taking us through all of those user settings. I'm just going to select some. Someone, I think I was over in the question doc, so I'll ask this verbally first. We'll actually answer this. Somebody asked about what sort of different pages you might have load up when you're doing that multiple pages on startup, and I know you talked about the Google ones. I used to have different pages by year group, so I used to use Google Sites, and we had, for example, year 11 revision site, and options choices for year 9. And so what we would do is at particular times of the year, based on particular year groups, we would filter it down to that level. So if you're thinking about what you could have on that, it's a really useful way. And of course, students can still close those sites down, but they couldn't then really say, well, I didn't know there was a revision site, or I didn't know there was an option site, because every time they're logging onto a device, it's in there. Somebody asked a question a bit earlier on. This is a question from Elliot. Can it be identified on the home screen of year group devices what year group that device belongs to? My advice on this one, and Dan, jump in if you've got any other ideas, would be probably to use the various background options. And so one of the things that we used to do was that we used to use colours. So I used to know off the top of my head that if a Chromebook started up and it had a bright green screen, it was actually a year 7 device. And I think year 8 was yellow and year 9 was blue, and so on. So they all had the same like school logo thing, but we used colours to sort of know where devices were, because both in the user settings and in the device settings, you've got that option to upload the backgrounds. So my advice would be back, unless you think of a different way, Dan.
Yeah,
my thing would be backgrounds.
We do actually do something to do this. So there's a setting which you've put me on the spot now, and I wish I could remember where it is. One of my colleagues actually found it. It turns on to display in the top right hand corner the asset ID and the serial number, and it shows it on the login screen. And our asset IDs are related to what year group the students are in. So when I open a Chromebook, I can quickly see what year group that's in. Now, obviously, that's all well and good if your asset IDs match the year groups, which I always do, because we do that on purpose to help. But that's one way that you can do it. Obviously, if you don't use an asset ID in there, for an actual asset ID, you could always use that field to put year 7 in or something like that to do that. But yeah, there's ways around to do it, but nothing obvious. You have to be a bit creative.
Yeah, no, I think both of those are different. Interesting that we both came at that different ways with solutions. Yeah. We may as well hit the big question, because I'm seeing printing questions are everywhere at the moment. So let's talk about that. So various people have asked this in different guises in the doc and in the chat. So how can I enable the Chromebooks to print to my managed printers without mobility print? Can't seem to print directly to printers. When searching for printers, they are listed but can't print. So have you got your printer set up?
So we have mobility print, which does not answer your question at all, because you're asking how to do it without mobility print. But that is how we do it, and I know that's how a lot of schools will do it. But yeah, so we were already a paper-cut managed school before we went to Chrome and Chromebooks. So you don't have to be a paper-cut managed school, because mobility print is free. It's such an easy solution. It is what I would recommend personally. There is a few more out there. I know there's been a few upcoming, especially since the recent removal of cloud print. A lot more have surfaced and whatnot. And it is. How have you used it in the past? Have you used papercut as well? Have you used something different, Andy?
We also papercut. I know there's other, I don't want to just mention one. So I know there's things like directprint.io. I want to try and be really impartial and not just mention one company. So there's things like directprint.io and other ones. But we were a bit like you. I don't know whether it's just schools tend to have papercut in, but we already had papercut and we were using it. So it was the route that we chose as well to bring that on board. So we were similar. But yeah, there are a range of alternative solutions that Google have brought out in that area. That you can use, and some are obviously paid solutions, but as you said, papercut offer a free level, and there are also some free extensions in the Chrome Web Store now that can deal with different printers in a variety of different ways. And what I will do is I will dig out. I've got some documentation on printing, so I will after today's webinar, I will drop all our printing documentation into the Q&A doc. So I will add, because we're not kind of heavily covering printing today, but I will add all of the different guides I've got for different routes that you might want to consider for printing into the Q&A doc a bit later. once we get past this section. And yeah, we've got people mentioning lots of different things now. Abby's saying we could use Canon Uniflow because Canon have released a Chrome extension. So there is a big range of them out there. So I'll pull together some advice for that a bit later. But we've also got quite a few questions about apps. So I think before we answer app questions, Dan, you want to take us through. Okay, so now we've got our Chromebook set up. We've got it enterprise enrolled. When the student logs in, we've got all the policies coming on that we want the student. How do we now choose what they can and can't use in terms of the apps that they see on their Chromebook? So
let's get to it. If you want to, let me show you. Let me jump back to the home page and we can see where we're going from there. Now, what you shouldn't do is immediately think that this app's logo here is where you want to go. It looks like it should do, and my light's just gone off because I'm sat in the office where the motion sensor is too far away. Hopefully you can still see me. I might have to go run and turn that back on. 1 second. What you want to do instead is still go back to devices again. We're still looking at it from there, and we're going to go back into Chrome, and here we've got apps and extensions. So we're going to click into that, and that's where we're going to go. So here we're on user and browsers, and this is where we can roll out apps and extensions and anything that you want, within reason obviously, from this section here. To briefly touch on kiosks, not into loads of detail, but if you are using kiosks, which is what Andy mentioned, this is where you also roll out the applications for kiosks, and you can drop, once you've put them here and inserted them here, this none button will actually show you the different apps and you can auto launch something from there. So that's how you would do the digital signage. That's what we do as well. Well, a little bit, we're going to do more. But the main bit of how you want to install apps and extensions is in this section. So as you can see, we've already got some options here, but I'm going to go through it so you can see. Right. Ignore the exclamation mark. It's just telling you that Android apps are disabled for this organizational unit that I'm looking at. So that's why they're there. So to add an app and extension, you want to select the OU that you want to roll it out to. And you're going to hit this big yellow plus in the bottom right hand corner. If you hover over it, you actually get 4 further options. The top one is, if I can actually manage to hover over it close enough, is add by URL. Then we've got add the Chrome app or extension by ID. We have add from Google Play and add from the Chrome Web Store. So we're going to click add from Chrome Web Store, and that's going to open up the Chrome Web Store that you probably know when installing extensions yourself, maybe on a personal account or something like that. Now, it's showing you examples recommended for you, etc., here. Or if I want something specific, I can search. Now, obviously, other extensions are available, but one that obviously is very common at the minute is Mote. So Mote is a voice feedback tool. So I want to roll that out to an OU. I'm going to click this and click select. And that's now going to allow install. So what that means, by default, sorry, that is allow install. What that means is that if the users within this specific OU goes to the web store and found Mote in the web store, it would allow them to install. Now, I can change that to force install, which means it installs it automatically for them, or block. Now, I'll come back to block in a second, but that is where you change it. So maybe I want to force install this. So you click force and then remember to click save. And once that's saved, that will start updating all the policies. Once the Chromebook pulls down the pulls down the updated policy, it will then install that extension. There is another section here which I'll just touch on. So the allow users to install other apps and extensions. And from here, you can block all of the apps and extensions or allow other apps and extensions from the Chrome Web Store only. What that means is maybe you want to allow your staff to install extensions themselves. Now, that's not a recommendation through data protection reasons and whatnot, because they could, if you allow that, they can go and install whatever they want. So on our domain, the default is block all their apps and extensions. Then the only thing that is allowed to install is what I put in. So then you can arrange it so you've got the ones that all staff need, you can force install those. If it's something which maybe only certain faculties need, then you can allow install and just tell them to go install it. Or if you specifically want to block something, as an example for this, we recently changed our filtering provider, and the original filtering provider had an extension. The new one has an extension, and even though we removed the original extension from this, because of the time it takes for policies to roll out and whatnot, it's pretty instantaneous normally, but it was causing issues. So I put a block in for the old one, and that way it removed it, like it forcibly removes, if you will, this block, as well as stops it from ever installing again. So that is what you'd want to do. Block all other apps and extensions. Definitely for students. You might be a bit lenient for staff, but my recommendation would be to block for everybody, and maybe just have a nice way of allowing staff to tell you about it and turn them on. So that's, I'm going to force install Mort there. If I actually click on this extension, it opens up this on the right hand side. Now, you might never need to actually go into this, and for most extensions you never will, but some you might. And let me just see if I can actually show you an example of that. So this is actually in my domain at the moment, and so there's nothing here which you can't see, so that's fine. But for example, on here, this is our filtering system here. So this is an extension which is installed, and you can actually set a policy. So on this bottom right hand corner, it says policy for extensions. You can input different values into there, which changes how the extension works. So that's something to be mindful of as well. But back to this one. We've installed an extension there, so that was through the web store. Let's see what else we can do. So we can add by URL. Oh, of course, I need to save. Save Dan. At least it told me that time that I hadn't saved. We'll try again. Plus by URL. So you've got two options here. You can do browser tab or separate window for open the website, and you just drop a URL in this. So the reason for this is it adds a URL and it installs a progressive web app. So a progressive web app, or PWA, is a progressive web app, to keep it simple. But things like Twitter, I know it's not highly relevant to education, but that has a progressive web app. So you may notice, in this case, obviously we're in the admin console, so you won't see, but in the address bar at the top, if you're ever on a website, which you're over in this right-hand side, at the far right of the address bar, has a little circle with a plus in it, and if you hover over it, it says install. If it has that, then it means it's a progressive web app. So then you can drop that URL into this box here, click save, and that's going to actually install the progressive web apps for that website. And then that means it's an actual app on your Chromebook. So for example, down here, you can see I've got a Twitter icon and a Google Chat icon down here. Both these are actually progressive web apps, which I've installed manually myself, not through rollout, but I could put the URL in here and roll it out for everybody if I wanted to. You can also do Chrome app by extension or by ID. Now, you might ask why you might want to do this, and I have an example here. So I have an extension ID here. So that's not a string of characters that you're going to remember very easily. So it's not advantageous for you to remember to do this for everything. I just had this copied for a reference. So I can click save on that, and that's going to install an extension. In this particular case, it's mute tab. Mute tab allows you to mute tabs individually and whatnot. It was really useful in conjunction with a couple of other extensions before the official breakout rooms came out. Now, the reason that you might want to install via an extension ID is some extensions aren't on the web store. An example of these are maybe things that you go and buy from other companies. Some providers that come with extensions for different reasons, they might not be on the web store. They might just send you the extension ID, and that is how you add that one. So that is another extension added. It filters by the ID immediately. So if I want to exit off, I can then see the rest of these, and you can see. Also, for example, this one here is force install and pin. That's because it's slightly different, because you can pin it to the taskbar at the bottom. That's what the pin means. Then we're going to go lastly on terms of the different types of extensions and apps, should I say, sorry, that you can install is from Google Play. So Google Play is the Play Store for Android apps. So for these to work, you've got to have Android installed or set up to be allowed on your Chromebooks. I think the majority of Chromebooks past a certain version, and I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, can allow or has the capabilities of running Android, and it opens up a wide range of different tools that you might want to use. So a good one would be Squid Notes. It's a brilliant note-taking Android application, especially if you have got a Chromebook with a stylus, or even if it's just touchscreen, it works pretty well, but a stylus is obviously ideal. And if I want to install this Android application, I can click select here. That's going to drop it into this window, very similar to how it was before. Allow install, force install, and pin. So I'll force it is going to force install and pin is going to force install on the Chromebook and then pin it at the bottom in the taskbar. Allow install allows the user to go to the Play Store themselves on the Chromebook and install it that way. So maybe I want to force install and pin this specific one. I'm going to click OK on that, click save, and that is an Android application rolling out. Obviously, in this particular case, we get the exclamation mark because this specific OU does not allow Android, but Android is a different topic entirely in terms of looking at that. But yeah, so that's extensions in a nutshell, really. I'm sure we've got some more questions, maybe. Let's have a look. Let's check the doc, see if anything's come through on the doc.
I thought to add myself in there. There are some questions coming in. And I just wanted to start by just talking about the different apps, because I often have to explain this. I've worked with some schools and they push out lots of Android apps. So my sort of policy on apps is often the web-based versions of most Google tools are appropriate for use. I think, Dan, you probably agree with that.
Yes.
So my first thing is there a web tool? Is it, or does it exist? You know, things like Drive and Docs and Sheets within the Google environment just live very nicely on web. Things like Canva just open as a website and work really well in that web environment. So that's my sort of prime choice for apps. If that's not available because I need to set a particular tool, then I suppose my next really feature is, well, maybe there's an Android app, or maybe the Android app offers me some functionality the web doesn't. And so I mentioned a couple of, you're already going to bring it up here, Steve. So Jamboard, for various reasons, the Jamboard Android app has got additional functionality. It's got some shape identification tools. It doesn't need fancy thing with pictures. And so Jamboard is one sort of exception to the rule, isn't it? Where you might install the Android app over the web-based version. And the other exception that is a slightly unusual one is, strangely, for teachers, is Google Classroom. Because the Google Classroom app, the Android app, has the ability to write on students' work. So if you've got teachers with Chromebooks with styluses, then putting the Android app for teachers on means they can open up a student's work, write, maybe ticket, use their mark scheme. And there's often, teachers who like that style can use their stylus and, if you like, traditionally mark the work. And the student gets the work back as a PDF in Google Classroom. So I'd say the couple of exceptions are Classroom and Jamboard to the sort of that policy. In terms of pushing out apps. One thing I would say is that bear in mind that changes in the admin console take time. And that includes pushing out apps, and particularly Android apps. Because imagine if I pushed out a massive Android app to 1,600 Chromebooks. Well, if Google didn't do anything about that and just tried to do it all at once, it would potentially bring my network down, wouldn't it? If I pushed a huge app to a big number of Chromebooks while they're all in school, it could cause me real issues. So Google staggers these things taking place. And so don't expect, one of the things I often say to teachers is, if you come and knock on my door and say, can you add an Android app to all my Chromebooks? Don't expect to instantly be able to do that to every Chromebook in the school. It needs a bit of notification, a bit of time for that to roll out to users. So do that. And then somebody asked, I've seen lots of different questions coming in around sort of data protection and those pieces. And that's a really good point, actually, which is that one of the reasons why a lot of schools turn off lots of apps, so you turn off the Chrome Web Store, turn off the Android Play Store, and you can't actually have the Play Store wide open. You can have the Chrome Web Store wide open, the Play Store can't. Is that allows you in the network management or the admin management position to look at an app and make a decision on whether that's appropriate for use in your school. So I'm seeing some questions around that. So I think that's picked up those questions. I'm just we are now really approaching the end of today's webinar. Before we do, I want to try and spend about 5 minutes just doing as many questions as I can from the list, or getting Dan to answer them before we go through our final close piece. And any we don't get time to answer, as I said, I will go back into the document later. The advantage of the Q&A doc is I can put links and further details to follow up on. So I will have left some notes in there about links. I'll put links in later. So somebody asked that I've covered the one about apps. I want to just pick. Somebody asked, this is a slightly unrelated question, but I'll answer it here anyway. I did the Google Educator level 1 years ago. I know it's expired. Can I jump straight to level 2? The answer to that is yes, you can. You don't need to do level 1 to do level 2. But bear in mind that some of the higher level qualifications that sit above level 2 require both. So Google certified trainers have to have a live level 1 and level 2. So whilst there's nothing to stop you doing level 2 right now, if you later become a trainer, you'll have to go back and do level 1 again. Are there any training videos for the admin console other than this one? Dan, do you want to answer that one? Admin console training. What's out there?
You've put me on the spot now. There's probably loads out there. Go on. I think you've led me question there. You've led me down.
I thought you might talk. Don't you do a weekly? Don't you yourself run a group of people?
Well, I do a little bit, but it kind of devolves into just a conversation about nothing technical. So I wouldn't recommend it to anyone who actually wanted to learn anything. It's a great, if you're technical, it's a great environment to come into. It's not very helpful.
So I know that Dan runs Vet. So there are taking people through different steps. So there are some resources over on Google's side in Coursera. There is still the admin certification. Well, it's not a certification, but there's an admin training area in Coursera for the admin console. That's certainly worth a look. I would say there is a wide range of videos on YouTube now that filter in on different settings for the admin console. But one of the things I always say about the whole range of tools out there, and I say to lots of schools, is there is no one right answer to a lot of these questions. And I can work with one school and they can make a really valid case for why a feature or a setting should be turned on. And I can go to a different school and they can make an equally valid case as to why that feature or setting should be turned off. So I always say it's about thinking about your own school, your own situation. And that links probably into nicely. Someone asked about a chat. Is there a tool for chat? I don't know where that's gone. Oh, yeah. Is there an app that will let you send a message to all users? Somebody asked that in the chat earlier. And I think some people answered, there are Google tools themselves like Google Chat that could do that. There were at one point some third-party Chrome extensions as well that allowed messaging. But again, you need to think through then, do I want a messaging system? Who do I want to be able to access that system and the pros and cons of a messaging system? But there are, I would say within the Google suite, there's chat itself. And then wider than that, there were some third-party extensions. I will try and find links to those extensions and drop them in Q&A doc later. So that will hopefully answer that question. I'm just scrolling back through all our questions now to see if there's any others that we haven't answered. To make sure I pick them all up. There's one earlier that I wanted to do from in the document. Oh, about deprovisioning. So I'm going to just share my screen about licensing and deprovisioning. So I'm going to just bring my screen back in and just that's the Q&A doc and just talk about this, about the licenses and deprovisions, because there's a few questions around that. So let's see if the console has left me signed in. Moment of truth. Yes, I am. So when you've got the Chrome Education Upgrade, which is the license that allows you to manage your devices, that's usually provided when you buy a device. So if you buy a device for a reseller and you're a school, that's very often comes as part of that. You'll be paying extra for it. Obviously, you buy a device in a different route, you might have to go and buy a license separately. Those licenses are then added to your console. So I can see my licenses up here. If I go up top right-hand side when I'm on the Chrome page, I can see upgrades there. And as you can see, it tells me that I've obviously at some point got 30 licenses. I've only got 2 in use, the 2 computers there, the 2 devices. I've got 28 left. So you can always get a picture there of your licenses, whether you've got the sort of right number at this point. That license lasts the lifetime of the device, but it is bound to that device. So if you deprovision a device, that license doesn't come. I would say doesn't come back is the official answer. There are a couple of variations on that, and that is if you switch a device over for a warranty refresh. So let's imagine you get a device from a manufacturer and it doesn't work, and you go back and switch it. There are some forms you can fill in, and I'll grab the link later and put it in the Q&A doc to say, look, actually, I went through this process. It isn't a new device; it's a replacement for an old one, and you can get another license added to your domain. So I'll drop the form that you can use for that. But effectively, it's the lifetime of the device. When the device comes to the end of life, because the student's left or the device is broken or whatever happens at the end of your device, then that license is effectively used at that point. So hopefully that answers the licensing questions. And that's one of the reasons why we tend not to deprovision devices unless really we are at end of life. We tend to just disable them in the console if we're not sure about them. So I hope that answers some of the questions I saw around device licensing. And I will go and answer anything I promised links to. I will get this evening into that Q&A doc. So if you want to leave me a little bit, I'll get that into the doc very much later. So some final pieces from me, some final words from me. Done those bits. Some just resources that you might find useful in addition to what we've talked about. You're obviously all signed up to watch today's webinar, so you've obviously already seen our website at bit.ly/GFE UK events. We are running across the UK and for people from around the world who want to come and join us, a big series of events to support the use of Google Apps, Chromebooks, devices in schools. And that includes some admin sessions. And next week, for example, we're running a focus session on using Chromebooks in schools with Office 365. So if you're in a school that's predominantly using the Windows tools and 365, we're going to do a focus webinar on that next week. So feel free to join us for any of those webinars. And we also do another webinar that looks at the admin console and a range of webinars looking at the tools. So all the information for the webinars is at bit.ly/GFE UK events. And you can always watch back webinars that have already taken place. So this webinar will be up there to watch from a bit later on today. In addition to that, I always say if you're someone who's got access to the admin console, you should sign up for updates at workspaceupdates.googleblog.com. It's whenever new changes take place, it's where Google posts those changes. And so, if you've got access to admin console, you ought to be aware of what's coming, what's changing, what new features are coming out. So get yourself signed up for the workspace updates at that link there. And some more general sites really aimed towards teachers. Don't forget teachfromanywhere.google, Google's support hub for remote and distance learning. Oops, I managed to cause the OK Google feature to come on. And finally, the Teacher Center, which is a solid source of both tool-based and classroom-based training courses, including our Level 1, Level 2 certifications for teachers, our programs like Innovator, Trainer and Coach, and resources to support teaching in schools, and particularly some great resources there on accessibility. So if you want to dig more into the accessibility area, some great stuff to fill in there. And really, it just leaves me now to say a sort of a final thank you. I'll bring Dan back up. I want to thank Dan as well. Thank you, Dan, for joining us today. And for anyone watching, don't forget the feedback form in the doc. Feedback form in the chat there. It'd be great if you could give us some feedback on today's session. A big thank you for everyone joining us today. I will update Q&A doc later, so feel free to keep the Q&A chat going, and I'll jump in there later. But great to have you all along today. Hope you found it useful. See you all again soon. Bye, everyone.
See you later. Bye.